Right in the middle of this entire crisis, when the levels of combat and violence have been increasing, the destruction is huge, global tensions are at an all-time high, this is what President Putin has basically tested. It's called the Sarmat. It's one of Russia's most capable and highly anticipated nuclear long-range missiles. It's a ballistic intercontinental range missile. But why has he done it now, when it has all the potency to ratchet up nuclear temperatures and tensions once again? What is the signal going out? Take a look at this report.
On 20th April, Russia test-launched its intercontinental ballistic missile, Sarmat, believed to be adding more power to its nuclear arsenal. US Congressional Research Service claimed that Russia is expected to deploy Sarmat with 10 or more warheads on each missile.
Dear comrades, I congratulate you on the successful test firing of the Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile. This is a big significant event in the development of advanced weapon systems for the Russian army. The new system has the highest tactical and technical characteristics and is able to overcome all the missile defense capabilities.
The heavy intercontinental ballistic missile Sarmat has been under development for years now. Its test launch at this crucial juncture of war is an ominous sign, and the Russian president is well aware of it.
It will have no equivalents in the world for a long time. This truly unique weapon will enhance the military potential of our armed forces and will reliably provide security for Russia from external threats and will make others who, in the heat of frantic, aggressive rhetoric, try to threaten our country, think twice.
The intercontinental ballistic missile was test-launched from Plesetsk in northwest Russia and hit targets in the Kamchatka Peninsula in the Far East. Bureau Report, India Today.
Okay, let's tell you a little bit about the Sarmat, which is the newest missile that President Putin's forces have just tested. It's an intercontinental range ballistic missile, which means ranges in excess of 9,000 kilometers. It has a range of about over 11,000 kilometers and has a weight of about 308 tons. Huge missile. This huge missile has just been tested. It's an intercontinental range ballistic missile. It's a 3-stage liquid-fueled ballistic missile. And remember, it adds to the current arsenal of intercontinental range ballistic missiles that Russia already has. It is about 35.3 meters long, 3 meters in diameter. That's pretty much what the Sarmat missile that has been tested actually looks like at this point. It can carry more than 10 warheads. It is said to be technically superior to any intercontinental nuclear missile, that has been there. It has faced some delays. It's been in development since the 2000s. This test was expected, but for it to happen at this point of time is what has raised a lot of nuclear eyebrows all around the world. And most importantly, while testing this missile, the Kremlin has said this is not only our most technologically advanced nuclear weapon, it's also something that will give our enemies food for thought. So dangerous, provocative language being used along with a test of a weapon system at a time when tensions are at an all-time high. A great deal of messaging taken place. But remember, is nuclear war possible, or is it too far-fetched? One of the world's most respected Russia watchers, a Harvard professor named Dr. Ravi Abdalal, has spoken exclusively to India Today's Rahul Kanwal, and he had this very ominous prediction to make.
Tactical nuclear strike is a possibility. Words that will echo through war rooms across the world. Not just random analysis, but the words of one of the world's most respected Russia watchers.
Engage with the world.
Harvard professor Ravi Abdalal, director of Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, an academic whose views on the world's biggest story is one of the most sought after.
Is not about Russia versus Ukraine, but about Russia versus the West. And for that logic, we need to think about what are the ways in which Russia and NATO could come into direct conflict that could lead to a nuclear exchange between the great powers, as opposed to a single tactical nuclear strike in Ukraine.
Professor Abdalal's world-exclusive interaction with India today adds ominous urgency to the aura of nuclear threat surrounding Russia and Ukraine. His words come just a day after Russia's foreign minister, in his only interview so far in the war, played down the nuclear threat that has emanated consistently from Moscow.
The Russian military has these hypersonic missiles, which are good at evading missile defense systems. It has thermobaric weapons, the so-called vacuum bombs. As far as we know from the outside, the Russian military has used one of each, probably to demonstrate what they can do, but have not yet escalated to the widespread use of these really terrifying weapons, much less the possibility of a tactical nuclear strike on the territory of Ukraine.
There could be no winners in a nuclear war, and therefore nuclear war must never be launched.
Obviously,
Professor Abdalal is the second top-tier American academic to highlight the nuclear threat emerging from Russia. Last month, Princeton University's Dr. Zia Mia echoed the fear.
This is part of the script of the nuclear age. So nuclear weapon states say this because they can, because they have nuclear weapons.
Away from the nuclear threat, Professor Abdalal also sees Ukraine's current weapon levels as only enough to keep its head above water.
the Ukrainian military, and indeed the Ukrainian civilians who have been waging this counteroffensive against the Russians, have perhaps been armed enough to achieve a kind of stalemate, though not enough to win the war.
More ominously, the Harvard professor predicts the longer the stalemate, the more destructive things could get, with newer weapons entering the combat mix.
But the longer the stalemate lasts, the more likely there will be escalation on the Russian side, using weapons that they have mostly not yet used in ways that will be difficult for the rest of us to watch and horrible for the Ukrainians to endure.
With only some indicators on where the war is headed and what the endgame is, the Harvard guru makes a pronouncement that provides shape to the next steps. That there's little chance of the war winding down soon.
President Putin has gambled his historical legacy on this war, which means that there is no backing down. There will be no end to this war until the Russian president feels that he can narrate some sort of achievement, both militarily and politically, from the war.
On India Today, the most sought-after academic and strategic minds provide their views first, allowing us and you, the viewer, navigate this emerging conflict. With Rahul Kawal in Boston, Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, after back-to-back nuclear dares from Russia, a kind of rollback saying nuclear war is off the table, and now this sudden testing of the most capable Russian nuclear missile amidst the highest levels of tension in Ukraine. Here's a report telling you why the world is actually not very sure about what comes next and why it has reason to be worried. An unending invasion war, weeks of savage battle, countless deaths, cities in complete ruins. But no massive win to show on the ground for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Amidst the fierce fight back by Ukraine and biting Western sanctions, ominous signs for the world have emerged. Putin has resorted to the Brahmastra in his arsenal, the massive Russian stockpile of nuclear weapons, openly threatening a no-holds-barred nuclear war, refusing to rule out the use of nuclear weapons if there is an existential threat to Russia. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov had earlier warned that any third world war would be nuclear and destructive. A threat repeated by the Kremlin with chilling resonance.
The outcome of the operation, of course, is not a reason for usage of a nuclear weapon. We have a security concept that very clearly states that only when there is a threat for existence of the state in our country, we can use, and we will actually use, nuclear weapons to eliminate the threat for the existence of our country.
Let me assure you, a responsible member of the international community committed to its obligations to non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Russia is taking every possible measure to prevent Ukraine from getting nuclear weapons and respective technologies.
The nuclear saber rattling is one of many that Russia has openly indulged in. Just days into the Ukraine invasion, Vladimir Putin had put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert as a chilling warning to NATO and the West.
Dear colleagues, as you can see, not only Western countries take unfriendly measures against our country. In the economic dimension, I mean the illegal sanctions that everyone knows about very well. But the top officials of leading NATO countries allow themselves to make aggressive statements with regard to our country. That is why I ordered Defense Minister and Chief of General Staff to put Russian Army deterrence forces on high alert.
It has now emerged that Russia had even dispatched its nuclear ballistic missile submarines into the North Atlantic as the war raged in Ukraine. After their deterrent patrol, the submarines were quietly pulled back by the Kremlin. The West fears that Russia, suffering massive reverses in Ukraine's war theatre, could resort to using tactical nuclear weapons, which are of a small yield but can devastate an entire city. In a bid to escalate the war and force Ukraine to agree to its terms on the negotiations table.
Allies agreed to supply equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats. This could include detection equipment, protection and medical support, as well as training for decontamination and crisis management. We are also enhancing allies' preparedness and readiness for chemical and biological and nuclear threats.
A calculated nuclear gambit or plain brinkmanship to turn the tide in a war that has simply not gone Russia's way as expected. Whatever it may be, the Ukraine war triggering nuclear moves comes as a massive alarm bell for the entire world. Most analysts believe that Russia's saber-rattling with nuclear weapons is precisely that. It's muscle flexing, it's signaling, it's posturing, and nobody really means to actually use nuclear weapons. But the fact is that the nuclear weapons available in the world today are more than enough to destroy the only planet we have. And Russia is currently sitting on the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons of any country in the world. Take a look at how many nuclear weapons there are in the world, who has them, how they can deliver them, and what that impact would be. Debris, devastation, damage. The Ukraine war, an image of the brute power of modern militaries. But nothing comes close to the kind of doom that would become real if the threats being thrown about by the powers at play come to life. With Putin putting the world on nuclear notice by placing his strategic arsenal on war alert, you may be wondering about the strength of the world's nuclear weapons arsenal. You may not know this, but Vladimir Putin currently controls the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Russia, during this crisis, has made not one, not two, but 3 nuclear threats. They've even operationalized and put on high alert their nuclear arsenal. Here's a look at the number of nuclear warheads that each country is known to have just now, because it's all about the numbers. Russia is the country with the largest nuclear arsenal, with over 6,200 nuclear warheads at this point of time. The United States has just a few, somewhat fewer warheads, no less powerful, at 5,550. And then there's China, which has 350 nuclear weapons at this time. For comparison, the only other two NATO countries in Europe that have nuclear weapons are, of course, France, which has 290. You've got UK, which has 225. Pakistan has 164. Remember, in the nuclear world, these numbers are enough to destroy the world many times over. India has 156 nuclear weapons. Israel has about 90. North Korea, we think, has between 40 and 50 nuclear weapons. Each of the nuclear powers also have formidable delivery systems to deliver their weapons of mass destruction. Starting with the most secretive and stealthy platforms, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, some of which Russia had sailed into the North Atlantic at the beginning of this invasion of Ukraine. So starting with the Russian nuclear ballistic missile submarines, like we said, is the Bore class of submarine. There are 10 that are supposed to be in service, and their main weapon is the Bulava intercontinental submarine-launched ballistic missile. The Bore class is the mainstay. Moving on to the United States, they have a fleet of 14 Ohio-class SSBMs, or ballistic missile nuclear-powered submarines. The Trident ICBM is the primary nuclear weapon on those submarines. Then you've got China, which has a fleet of 6 Jin-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, which have the Julang-2 missile, which is their major primary deterrent weapon. Moving on to France, it has the Triomphant class, a fleet of 4 such submarines, nuclear ballistic missile submarines, where they've got their own weapon system on board those as well. Those also go out on strategic deterrent patrols. Moving on to India, of course, we've got 2 Arihant class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. The Agni series of missiles and their derivatives, the K-15 and the K-4 missiles, are our nuclear-capable submarine-launched missiles on that particular submarine. And finally, the United Kingdom has the Vanguard class, a fleet of 4 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, where the US-built Trident missiles are the primary nuclear weapon on board those submarines. So many, many nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines already in the world. Nuclear powers also have land-launched ballistic missiles designed for intercontinental range nuclear delivery. Russia depends on its arsenal of Topol-M long-range ballistic missiles designed for nuclear strike out to ranges of 11,000 kilometers. The US has Minuteman III ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads out to 13,000 kilometers. China's Dongfeng series of ballistic missiles have large ranges to deliver nuclear warheads, including the Dongfeng 31, capable of nuclear strike out to over 11,000 kilometers. And remember, the land leg of India's own nuclear command has the Agni 5 missile, capable of carrying out a nuclear attack out to 5,500 kilometers or more. All of these long-range missile systems are operational and ready to be deployed at short notice. And in response to Russia's nuclear signaling, are in fact on reciprocal high alert. And apart from land and sea, there's always the aerial option for nuclear bombing, very much like the first and only nuclear attack over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. The aerial option exists to this day with nuclear powers. Russia, which has been using the Kinzhal air-launched ballistic missile in Ukraine, has been fitting them with non-nuclear warheads. But the missile is capable of nuclear strike as well, and is part of Russia's strategic arsenal, with the missile deployable from MiG-31 fighters as well as Tu-22 bombers. The United States' nuclear air delivery platforms include the world's first stealth bomber, the B-2 Spirit, an enigmatic airplane capable of penetrating highly contested airspace for strategic bombing, and the monster B-52 Stratofortress, an 8-engined behemoth that's seen half a century of nuclear readiness. What we're telling you is that the world has enough nuclear weapons and delivery systems to doom us into non-existence in a flash of a second. Weapons that were developed during the Second World War and then proliferated as a method to keep the post-war peace. While they haven't stopped wars and destruction, they've certainly ensured there hasn't been another nuclear exchange after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But with the world's biggest powers turning up the nuclear heat, it's only natural that the world is on edge. Bureau Report, India Today.